Hey folks, thanks so much for your support through listening. If you really want to take that support to another level, we'd love it if you would support us by liking and following us wherever you listen to your podcast. Now, what would be really cool is if you help us fly this kite on pages like www.patreon.com. A simple search on that page for Kites and Strings will provide a gateway to donate as little as $1 per month. Cool perks are also available, so please check us out. For now, please enjoy this very special re-release. You see, we've had the opportunity to listen back to some past episodes and especially wanted to listen to our very first one. We're happy to say that although we feel we've made some advances in our tech, we love that the content holds up. It certainly introduces the podcast and it lays the groundwork for our focus on creativity, and it gives a sense of who Catherine and I are, and it discusses the metaphor of the kite and the string. All very cool. The only thing it really doesn't do until the end is introduce the idea that Kites and Strings is largely an interview-based podcast. Starting in episode 4, Kites and Strings starts to introduce fabulous guests who have found their own way to strike a balance with their creative selves. And a couple episodes later, we move to an exclusive interview-based podcast, which is something both Catherine and I love. We're so pleased with the wide variety of creative guests we've had on the show, including a professional opera singer like John Concepcion in episode 15, a professional ballet dancer like Empress in episode 18, circus performers like Russell Wu in episode 13, and a very creative bike salesman and event planner in the form of the hilarious Steve Buckdell in episode 8. And we've had a whole slew of musicians, visual artists, and authors. There are just way too many to list, but we encourage you to listen to them all. You'll note a few common things, but it's really cool and very interesting to see how each one of these episodes bring a unique perspective and ideas around string grabbing and kite flying. So strap yourself in for the re-release of Season 1, Episode 1. We're All Creative, recorded originally in early May 2020. Welcome to the podcast Kites and Strings, where we explore creativity and balance and the tension that exists as one tries to find their creative self and then find balance between being creative and living their fullest life. My name is Steve Bloom, an artist, a musician, a creative type who makes his living as a therapist and trainer consultant on Chicago's South Side. Like me, my co-host Catherine Shinnock is trained as an art therapist, is a licensed counselor, and she's from Chicagoland. She's a visual artist who's expanded her creative exploration into circus and aerial arts, and recently left Chicago for New York City to practice and create in the Big Apple. On the surface, we serve very different clientele, and it seems that our clients, like many, struggle with either recognizing their creative parts or reacquainting themselves with their creative self while living in the real world. We may mention our professional therapist lives from time to time, but in this podcast, we'll mostly explore our own perspective on living creatively, and hopefully we'll shed light on the many facets of the arts, being a creative, and living a balanced, fulfilled life. This is episode 1, so please bear with us. Podcasting is a new creative venture for both of us. We look forward to our discussions around creativity and hammering home the idea that everybody, yes, everybody is creative if they just allow it, and how life can be richer when we grab that string and fly that kite. So I don't know. I mean, my thinking was on this, as far as like putting together this podcast, is do what you love and find a way to get paid for it. I'm at that place. And I think of how easily I switch from what is considered my real work to my play work, which is writing music or doing stuff for the band or other things that I do in that area. And I always think about how it always comes back to being creative, right? And I know that there's all this sense of or how is it that creativity plays in? And we hear a lot of things about creative people and how, you know, scratching that part of the brain and being creative leads to longevity and health and all those types of things. So there must be something there. Not that I'm willing to really do all the research, but I believe it.
Who
And I
wants to
think
do the research? That's no fun. Let's just talk
right.
about it.
Exactly. Right. So, and I always have thought of you as being that type of person too. So
For sure. For sure. What's really interesting is hearing you say like your real work versus your play work. I would say my real work is also my play work. That I feel the same sense of like joy in my like play work that I do in the stuff that I earn my living doing.
right.
And I
And I
think
think
that's really like I feel really lucky with that.
right. And and it's interesting because you're right. You called me on that. And that's that influence of the world.
For sure.
Right.
For sure.
And the idea like this is the real work, right? This is the
Yeah.
stuff you get paid for, as opposed to the other stuff. And like, I mean, I'll even tell my wife, yeah, I'm going to go to work. And I know she's rolling her eyes because, some of the stuff I'm doing is not anything that pays the bills.
Well, but that's like, I think right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the thing where it's the embodiment of the like cultural value that art and creativity isn't real work unless you're doing it for corporate America or you're like showing at the Guggenheim. Between there isn't real.
Mm-hmm.
It's not valued.
So we've been inundated with that. And it's like, and I think that I've come to this point where I can move so smoothly between all these different facets of my life. And I really enjoy that. I don't see that happening all over the place. So then I had to ask the question, why creativity? Why is that so important?
Creativity, when I think of that word, I mean, that's everything. But if I pull back and I think about like art and like fine art specifically, whether it's drawing, painting, music, opera, like that doesn't really get valued to the point of like being in high school and it's like, oh, you're going to go to art school. Like that's immediately pissed upon. Like, why don't you go to a real university and like major in art? Go study art at Harvard versus like Parsons, RISD or SCAD. Like, no. Art degree from Harvard would be garbage. I mean, maybe
exactly. I don't know. Do they even have is there a pottery wheel at Harvard? Do they have one of those?
I want to go do pottery at Harvard now.
It's funny because my daughter's at Emily Carr University of Art and Design in Vancouver, and there's that part of me that's like, okay, that's so cool. And she wants to do large scale sculpture and she is, you show her something that gets to 2,500 degrees, she's there, right? She's sticking metal in it, she's throwing, because she just gets that feeling, which I think is really cool. But there is that part of me that says, yeah, when you say that, you feel a pressure to almost have to somehow explain it. And it's like, well, no, I don't want to feel that pressure.
Well,
right?
Here's the like indoctrination in the cult of capitalism that we've all been brewed in. Like, you're telling me that your kid's going to some school I've never heard of to study art and specifically study sculpture. And like, there was a little voice in the back of my head that was like, how's that kid going to make any money? And it's quiet, like, because of who I am, because of who you are, because of who your daughter is. But like that little like nag was still there of like, ooh.
And I'm thinking, part of it is, I mean, when I hear her story, there's that father side of me. I mean, she wants to, her plan is she wants to get a van and she wants to really drive around and find some artist community that she can squat in for a while, maybe do a residency somewhere. That certainly goes against sort of all that dad, like, okay, I want you to be able to pay the bills. But you know what? If she's happy, she's happy. And
totally.
there's a part of me, I'm glad she's in Canada because she has health care.
Yes. She has a plan, and her plan is realistic. She's found a way to like think about her life that lets her like do what she loves and basically kind of like say fuck the system.
She has classmates and they're all aspiring to be in fancy galleries. And she wants to blow glass. I mean, she probably wants to blow, bowls and paraphernalia for smoking pot.
No, don't set me up like that with your kid.
Yeah, but I mean, that's what she wants to do. And it's like, okay. I mean, and if she's happy doing that, that's great.
Yeah. Like you're valuing balance of creativity and like the air quotes real job. If a parent doesn't hold that value system, then the kid is really struggling because the kid is like fighting against get a job in marketing or business.
Right. The really woke parent is the one that tries to find that middle ground. Like, why don't you go into marketing? Then you can create ads for somebody, and it's like, that's not really woke. But, I think of a friend of mine who, she talks about like people will say, oh yeah, I really support the arts. And she says, really, what if your kid was going to go into the arts?
Love that question.
Right. And yeah, exactly. So it's like, if you really support the arts, would you encourage your kid to go into the arts?
Such a good challenge.
I wrote a song recently kind of based on some of this stuff. And there's a line that's like, yeah, what I produce brings awe and praise, but how many of us are deliberately raised? Right? How many people really deliberately raise their kid to be an artist? And a friend of mine I posed that to said, well, other artists.
Yeah, that's exactly my point. It's like, as an artist, you're able to raise your kid as an artist. But I want to go back to what you said about that, like, woke parent that's like, go do marketing because it's creative and you're making ads, but you're also in business. I think that's a parent that's trying. I'm not going to give them, like, the woke stamp. But I think that's someone who's looking at, like, how can you find balance? That's like a contrived way of trying to find this. Work the thing that gives you joy. Find the real job that gives you the joy of your creative life. But it's coming at it from this like top down, like heady intellectual way instead of like a heartfelt, inspiration driven way. So I'll give partial credit to that parent.
That's a C+ or maybe a solid B.
Yeah. Okay. I'll give that parent a B for trying. I mean, that parent's not the failure parent that's like, no, you must live the path I want you to live. They're trying to cultivate balance.
Right. We've been using the word creative, like raising creative, artistic kids. In the end, aren't we just really wanting happy, kind kids?
For sure. Like, and happy, also that happy or fulfilled.
Yeah.
But also recognizing that like happiness isn't an end goal. We don't like, yes, I have found happiness and fulfillment. Kumbaya, I will now stay here for the rest of my life. Like life will give us that roller coaster of experiences. And it's learning it's learning about how to ride the waves of emotion, of inspiration, of fulfillment, and recognizing that just because you may be in a place of sadness or lack of fulfillment or even like that creative rut, you're still, it's riding those waves that life gives you in a way where you're grounded in yourself and you're connected to who you are enough that you can live through them and learn from them and grow from them.
Right. So being able to say, this is a part of my life and recognizing it and owning it, and not owning it sounds like you have to somehow take responsibility for it. I don't like that sound. Right. But that idea, like, this is a part of me, and understanding that it certainly plays a role in who I am.
Yeah. I think owning it is taking responsibility for it, though. The part of me that I'm responsible for holding in a place of regard just as much as I'm responsible for holding my capacity to function in society in a place of regard.
Yeah, I can live with that. Yeah, it's giving it equal footing. Yeah. And saying that it's just as important and you need to recognize this. One of the reasons, I think we're talking about this is because I think people don't give that creative voice enough control of the mixer and the volume. Right? How do they allow themselves to do it? And this is one of the things and I think that allowing yourself to do it as an individual.
That's the key word. If you didn't circle back to it, I was going to say, like, your main point there is giving yourself permission to play.
Right. Well, and even in business adventures, right? Which I jump into a lot of things. I mentioned, at the beginning, it's like, well, how hard can it be? Right.
Yeah. Right? Hey, let's do a podcast. I'm like, okay.
I need to bring the listener up to speed here. Back in the early 2000s, maybe even the late 90s, shortly after meeting Catherine, I was really impressed that her and a partner at the time had came up with this idea to put a rainbow flag label on bottles of water and sell them in area grocery stores in Boys Town in Chicago. Really cool idea. Also really cool that they followed through with it. That's what I reference here. Right. Do you remember your Pride water?
Yeah.
Right. Oh, and I remember being so inspired by that. Right.
But do you remember that it also, then we did canine water and feline water, like specialized bottled water for your dog and cat?
But of course you did. Of course you did.
You know who this is? That is the creative genius of Thomas Caron. Like that wasn't, mm-hmm. I can't take credit for that. Like, so Tom,
but you listened to it and you followed it.
And that, yeah.
And you put some energy into it.
That's something that I absolutely learned from Tom, because he's the guy full of ideas. Like that was their business. What the Karens did was like, I don't know, some mail order, something business, but it would be like, he would have an idea to do something, would just like go out there and sell it. And what's fucking fantastic, Steve, what's so fucking amazing, this man is what, 90, 94, 95 years old right now. He is finally, not finally, this is not the happy part, but he's like acting his age as a 95-year-old man, where he's like, you know, his mobility he's losing his independence. He's losing his mobility. His thought organization is decompensating.
But 95, that's a good run.
But I shit you not, to this day, I will see him and he will say, Catherine, I've got a program I want to present to you. Program being idea for something. And
I love it.
Like, what's so beautiful is like, here's this guy and he's like, I think we need to put together like something like the phone book, but on the internet. And I'm like, yes, that already exists. But he's like, he's so like passionate about it, right? He's so like, this is a good idea. And what was this other one? Oh man, like they're great. There was something like sexual too, like some like perverted, like how do you find perverted pictures on the internet? Like Pornhub, Google boobs, and
exactly.
But he's still thinking, and that's where I'm like, I know, like, but when I sit down face to face, he's got an idea, and like that's what's so like amazing.
But then I think the allowing yourself to do it, right? You convince yourself that this idea is legitimate.
Like I'm selling you a concept. That's
right.
That's art.
Right. Well, and isn't that kind of what we've turned a lot of things what we've done, this creative energy, right? Going back to the bottles, the idea that, and it's like, okay, I've got this thing that I'm going to put out there. It's a new idea.
Yeah.
Right. And again, I think that you had the balls to kind of say, yeah, I've got this thing. I see it as legitimate. I'm going to put it out there, whether you made money at it or not. And that was the part that I was impressed by. It's like you had this like shower thought.
Yeah.
And then you followed it up after you got out of the shower. How many people have the shower thought, and that's where it goes down the drain with the water? You know.
Yeah. You know, and you know what? That I think is where the external validation comes in. I think part of having the shower thought. It's like, yeah, I've got it. I've got the momentum. And then you move forward. And a lot of times it's really hard to move forward on something without someone else supporting you in that. And so just having someone else say, shower thought's a decent thought. And pushing is, this happens all the time. Now I'm hearing my little other voice, but how about resources? And where do you get the resources? And where do you get the money? And how do you make it happen? And like, that's the voice that like kind of holds you back and holds you down.
Those are the barriers.
But I think there's value to the critic voice in not as like a stopper, but as a like sidecar. Right? Like I'm in my like motorcycle, I'm driving down my idea thought, and the like critic in the sidecar is like, where are you going to get gas next? And I'm like, oh yeah, I should probably get gas. Okay.
But I think but it's where you put that, right? If it's at the very beginning of the process, that little car doesn't get
Yeah.
momentum.
Yeah, totally.
Right. So you need that energy. You need to get that energy moving. And I think that's the step that people don't get past. They don't allow an idea to germinate and
Yeah,
get momentum. Or maybe they present it to somebody or they somebody throws a rag on it of some sort. Well, you can't do this, or you got to do this. And then it stops momentum right away, and then it dies.
Was like my decision to move to New York.
Mm-hmm.
It was like, I'm going to move to New York.
Right.
And it was like, yep, I knew I just had to do it. And so the momentum was there. And like maybe 2 months after I had this idea, I was traveling with a friend and we were talking about it. And he's like, I'm going to join the circus. And I'm like, I'm going to move to New York. And so then we almost had this like pact, like unofficial pact, but like, and we kind of were like, okay, like, and so I would like randomly check in, like, how you doing? And he'd be like, how you doing? And so neither one of us was like, I wasn't helping him. He wasn't helping me.
But you were helping each other.
We were the voice that goes against the critic. Like if anyone is pushing back, I always knew, because of course I got a million, why are you moving to New York? What are you doing that for? Your life here, blah, blah, blah. Right. Or like, what are you going to do for work? Where are you going to get a job? How are you going to live? Oh my God, it's New York City. And I knew Russell is my friend. Russell would just be like, yeah, you're going to do it. And I was like, Russell, of course you're going to quit your high paying consulting job and join the circus at 30 years old. Of course you're going to do that. Why wouldn't you do that?
Right. You were fuel for each other.
So we were fuel, but there was another, for me in moving here, it was the flow was more like, I just knew I was supposed to do it. And I think there's probably a lot of ideas to make a product that if you give yourself permission to really like sink into it and to just let yourself feel, I know I have to make this, you can just make it. You know what I think is a big block to this, to like allowing yourself to flow creatively? I think perfectionism really gets in the way. A belief that there's a right or a wrong way to do whatever you're trying to do.
Right. If I'm writing this poem, it's got to be the best damn poem ever written.
It has to be the right poem.
Right. And it's like, fuck that, just do it.
Do it and see what happens. And maybe you revise it, maybe you don't. Maybe the poem as it falls out of your brain is perfect in what it needed to be in that moment. Or maybe that was just the rough draft of it. And you won't know until you just let it fall out.
Right. Well, and I'm thinking of, we talking about sculptors, right? They talk about, they don't start with really a grand idea. They let the stone speak to them, right? And
is that true for every sculptor's process?
I don't know. I can't say. I don't think that's true. I do know, and this is as I've thought about writing music and stuff like that. I will come in with the slightest, it might be a little riff on the guitar, or it might be the first line. Yeah. But I don't know where that song is going to go.
Yes.
I write that song, right there. I just let it go, right? And that's sort of this allowing it to just fall out and trusting that when it falls out, it's going to be, it'll be fine. I
think of it as breadcrumbs. Like where like I get like a little piece of a drawing or a painting and then I sit and I just start to see the pieces show up. But I think a really challenging question is, where does that movement to the next like riff, or where does the movement to a lyric, where does that come from?
I think we can put our fingers on what has to be present in order to allow that thing to germinate, right? There does need to be some sense of confidence. And I think a person needs to grow up with the sense of believing that they can do things. Yeah. Right. Right. And that go and do it. Encourage yourself, they're encouraged to go and maybe make a mistake. Right. Because at the end it's okay. You tried. So I think that helps germinate it, but where it comes from before that, I don't know. Like what's the next little like piece that's going to shoot out and land there, and just letting that happen and recognizing the like innateness Mm-hmm.
of creative flow.
Yeah,
It's essential and innate in humans.
exactly. Exactly. And I guess, and that's again, the individual, it's going to come out different from one person to the next.
Yeah, yeah.
And as such, there is no right or wrong.
Exactly. Yeah, if I just let it happen, then it's great. But if I'm like, I am going to draw a human, and then I
Right.
sit down to try and draw a human, it's like,
Right.
all wrong.
Well,
But if
that's what blows me away about, like, when you think like for songwriters, right? Where people would go and they'd get a job, and their job, they'd sit in a room with a light bulb and a piano,
Mhm,
and their job was to go in there and write a song that day.
mhm.
And some people did it, and I'm sure there's some amazing things that came out of it. And maybe those are people that are able to tap into it at will. I don't know how often people can tap into it at will. And I don't think it's tapping into it at will. I think it's just allowing it to flow and knowing.
I think that's the real gift. And I think that's the hard part of like pursuing a career as a professional artist. And so like those kids at your daughter's school who want to have these big gallery shows, are they able to just make art and then maybe it ends up in a gallery show, or are they trying to make art for a gallery show?
Right, which is a problem. I mean, when you think of one of my favorite current, Banksy is amazing.
Uh-huh.
Right? He didn't start off thinking this is going to become gallery stuff, right?
No, he was graffitiing buildings.
Right, and then it turned into that.
So how do you put a value on your creative work? Or should you put a value on your creative work?
The only place you can measure success for some people is, well, how much money do they make a year?
How much money they make a year, or how many people say they like it?
Right. How many clicks do you get?
How many likes did you get?
Right, exactly. Because that's everybody striving for that, right? They're striving for some measurement to validate themselves, as opposed to just saying, fuck it, I like it.
Yes.
And it brings me joy. But again, there's going to be those people, well, then how do you make a living? Well, you know what? There's some people that maybe they make their living doing something else, but it allows them to play and have fun and to create.
Like, so a lot of the clients I've worked with are artists who have taken a job to make money.
Yeah.
And over time found that in that they've lost their art, that the demand of a 40-hour work week and the pressure of being a good employee has overridden the drive to create. And I think it goes back to that, like owning your artist identity and really recognizing for yourself that, like, looking at what's important to you, what brings you fulfillment. Do you get fulfillment through making art, music, writing, or cookies, right?
Mm-hmm. You know, I mean, I do think there's a lot of ways in which creativity comes out, and maybe sometimes that creativity is turned into something that looks, you know, even valued by society. I mean, I think of moms that I've worked with, and they're incredibly creative, even in this pandemic, and working with their kids, and how much they have to scratch a creative part of their brain in order to just manage their schedule.
I had a really interesting conversation yesterday where I think it's Charles Eames, the modern furniture designer, was credited as being someone who said something along the lines of, when we have limitations placed upon us, we're able to find new sources of creativity. So it's the difference between, like, I can do anything I want right now, or wait, I have to work in this little box. How can I maximize the space of this little box?
Yeah.
Living in New York City, how people choose to organize the small spaces that they live in.
Oh, yeah.
Like, when you have 600 square feet as opposed to 1,600 square feet, you really have to think differently.
Right. And that is certainly an outlet for creativity. And I think it's one that it's of value for people to notice and recognize that they are tapping into a creative bone, right? It may be coming out in a way that looks like just surviving. If you recognize that you have that pool of energy in you, and it comes out in the way you parent or the way you organize.
Totally. This is like one of my favorite things, is people associate creativity, and I think we talked a lot about this, like for the early part of this conversation, that people think of creativity as art, music, poetry, and really creativity shows up in like what you choose to wear every day. I have worked with someone who is like a career military guy, and he's like, I'm not creative. And I'm like, yeah, you are. Your creative style is Spartan. It's very, very Spartan. And it's how can I get the most done with the least amount of resources?
Mm-hmm.
But like this guy's probably never going to hang a painting on his wall. But that doesn't mean he's not creative. He's
Right.
found ways to maximize his space and utilize his space in just a way I wouldn't think to.
Right.
And like, that's the creativity, is that he's thinking in a different way. And it's just because I have like art and shit all over my walls doesn't mean I'm more creative. It just means I'm differently creative.
And that's where I think that would be of value to people, is to recognize that, yeah, they are creative, and here's the evidence of it.
Here's the science experiment that popped in my head on exemplifying how everybody's creative.
Mm-hmm.
To take 10 people and tell them to make a ham sandwich. I'm going to get 10 different ham sandwiches, because I'm not going to give them the materials to make a ham sandwich. You can use whatever you want. Make a ham sandwich. Everyone's going to have something different, and nobody's right or wrong.
Influenced by so many different things, and it all comes out differently. You're right. I think that's a good example. It really is beneficial for people to recognize that they're creative.
Yes.
And there's certainly, we can point to all sorts of evidence that suggests that. And then think about those people that once they realize they're creative, what they can accomplish.
Yeah.
Right? Once they think, hey, wait a minute, I do have this pool of energy in me.
Yeah.
Where can I go with this?
Yeah.
How many things didn't get invented? Right? Think of how many things.
I'm still waiting for the hoverboard from Back to the Future.
Right. But yeah, I mean, think about that. Or how many ideas that just weren't flown.
Huh?
How many things that were not invented because somebody had this critical voice that came from somewhere that said, that's not any good. Right.
So I think that's another challenge, right?
Right. Well, and that's the idea of like, certainly we need those individuals that talk about barriers and those things, because those things that we certainly have to contend with. So there you have it. We've talked about how creativity is dismissed and devalued in our society, but also how creativity can lead to fulfillment. That we're responsible for finding our own creative sides, and that we also need to give ourselves permission to create. Sometimes we need people to encourage us to create. We've learned that creativity can be experienced through the fine arts, as well as through simple things like organizing your closet. But now we need to talk about that tension that comes from trying to balance creativity in one's life. We're also going to learn about the significance of the kite and the string. It's a starting point. It's a structure. So sometimes we need structure. And I often look at, structure is, imagine a wall, right? And I'm on a wheeled chair.
Yeah.
I need that structure to push against in order to get movement.
Yes. It's the balance of tension.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I think, so if I like take this like structure and creativity, it's finding the tension between those. That's what balance is. It's finding the tension between those two that allows them both to optimize. Mm-hmm. Balance is movement. Balance
so
is never static.
It's like tight-roping or spinning plates.
Is handstands. If you look at a handstand person in a handstand, they look like they're not moving. If you look at an exceptional person in a handstand, they look like completely solid. Yeah. They are moving so much because they're making all these little micro corrections to get there. And like it's finding, and even getting into a handstand, it's finding how much pressure you need to use to find that spot.
So I mean, I guess that's the thing that we're narrowing in on here. It's like really appreciating both sides of this, but it's like really suggesting this idea of finding that balance, and that means acknowledging both sides equally, but also appreciating that tension, that time when it gets a little crazy. Could we go that far? I mean, if you're watching somebody spin plates, right?
Yeah.
And they've got 8 of them on stage. The tension comes when you see one wobble.
Absolutely.
Right? That's the fun of it.
It's interesting. The plate wobbler, the handstand, the tightrope, they're all in the middle, navigating this very kind of maybe mild movement within themselves. The more balanced you are, the smaller the dance is, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the person, so when you're talking about like the artist person, the pushback comes against the man or against the system, right? And when you go to rational, the pushback you're still finding the tension, you're still finding the balance, but it's not internal. It's I am this, and I'm gonna fight the artists are nothing, and this is garbage.
It's not internal.
Yeah, it's not internal. And I think to really be in that middle ground place, you have to be comfortable with an internal tension or dance, or if you know you skew to one end of the spectrum, that you surround yourself with someone who creates that external balance, like
the kite and the string.
Yeah.
Right? I mean,
tell us about the kite and string.
Oh, well, the kite and I mean, we know that a kite is not going to fly unless it has a string. Mm-hmm. Right? It'll be stuck in the trees somewhere or in the electrical wires.
Yeah.
But the kite loves to be up there flitting around and dancing around. It needs the string. And the string in between, there's always this tension between the string and the kite. Right? Right? There's always this tension, but they wouldn't exist if without the string, the kite's in the trees. Mm-hmm. Without the kite, the string is just lying on the ground. So they need this tension, and it's always going around. But I love what you were saying too about when you're on one side, the tension is this external. You're fighting this force that you perceive on the other end of the spectrum. Yeah. And that's where we see the biggest big arguments and aggression and tension. And then on the other side, but it's when you get to allowing that tension to be internal is when you get the most balance.
And you know what's really interesting? What I've heard some people say, and why I've encountered some people who don't like that internal tension, is because then it feels, and that's maybe the people who are more in this like middle space. They're not like too close or too far. This internal tension, then it feels inauthentic. I feel like I'm being inauthentic to myself because the tension, the disparity between the two sides is just a little bit too great, where it's like, well, who am I then? How can I be both of these? Whereas if it's a little closer and I can dance this way, but the more centered I am, the more the tension is smaller.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does. Do you think people fear in that moment?
Being in the middle?
Yeah. Or do you think they fear that idea? I mean, again, is it that fear of being identified with the other side?
So if I'm internal to myself and I'm in that handstand tightrope plate spinner place, I know who I am. And I have found in myself the resources to be creative, to be the kite and to be the string. But if I'm a little bit more like, I'm a kite, but I'm also a string. So you've got the one person who's like, I'm a kite, fuck it. And that person needs the string. And you got the string who's like, I'm a string. I don't need a fucking kite.
Right.
But it's the people who are like, I'm a kite. Wait, but I'm also a string. Can I be a kite and a string? And it's like finding that way to say, yes, you can be both. And by being both, you're not betraying the other. Oh my God, Steve, I've been doing this since fucking high school. The goth cheerleader. Come on. Yeah. The goth cheerleader, like, I'm both, bitches. Like, if you don't like me because I'm a cheerleader, fuck you. And if you don't like me because I'm a goth, fuck you. I can be both. I can hold that place of being both and not feeling a betrayal. And I love the high school because high school is great because you're working on identity development so much.
Right. So what we're thinking about here is helping people recognize all these elements.
You know, I think the place that we landed in that makes kind of the most sense is the like jock artist or like goth cheerleader, right? But like knowing where you skew more and how that's going to influence your comfort with pursuing your own creativity. Does your identity allow space for creativity?
Yeah. I like that. So that's our first podcast. It was a lot of fun. There's so many topics, though, that we touched upon that we know we want to address in future episodes. For example, where does creativity come from? And how is it that when we're in a pinch and really challenged, that we can be the most creative? We look forward to interviewing some way cool guests who seem to have gotten some things figured out. And of course, we'll continue to explore the concept of balance and managing that tension that we feel in our lives. And we'll often land on the side that we need to let that creative kite fly a bit while never letting go of the string. In the meantime, check us out at kitesandstrings.com or find us on Facebook.